In this lesson, we're going to talk about blood plasma. I like to think of blood as being like the soup and it has all these different components in it. But the first thing that we have to look at when we talk about blood plasma is that it's made up of 92% water and it takes up approximately 55% of the total blood volume. And what do I mean when I say total blood volume? Well, if we look in this tube here, this is the total blood volume, TBV, and it's made up of different percentages. So plasma takes up 55% of that blood volume. The other 45% is made up of this stuff called formed elements. Now, the formed elements are white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. So your Buffy code is actually going to be your white blood cells and platelets, and your red blood cells are going to make up your hematocrit. And it's going to vary depending on different genders, but for the most part, it's about 45%. Now, the other thing that's really important about plasma is that it has two really big functions. The first one is that it's a suspension, and all of these formed elements are parts of that suspension. The other thing that's really important about plasma is it actually serves as a transport medium. And what I mean by transport medium is that it will actually take a nutrient in or some other chemical or a necessary component, and it will actually transport it to a different area of the body that needs to go. Also in plasma, there are several different components that we're going to look at. And the first one are going to be these things called plasma proteins. And what plasma proteins are is they have several different functions that we'll talk about in just a second. But the first one is albumin. It's a really common one that a lot of people know about. But albumin is the smallest plasma protein, and it's going to be the most abundant plasma protein, which at about 60%. Another type of plasma protein that we look at is they're called globulins. And globulins, there's several different types. You've got an alpha 1, alpha 2, you've got a beta, and then a gamma. And what's important to know about the gamma is that it is not water soluble. So it functions very specifically with this lipid transport that we'll talk about in just one second. But it's not water soluble, so it works to really help in transporting those things. Two other plasma proteins that we look at are prothrombin and fibrinogen. Now, prothrombin and fibrinogen are clotting plasma proteins. That means when there's an active bleeding site, these two plasma proteins are going to go to that active site and help to stop the bleeding there. Now, when we talk about functions of plasma proteins, these are the things that we're looking at. First off, they help to maintain pressure balance within fluids. There's a really good lesson on fluid balance, and I encourage you to check that out. But when we're talking about pressure balance, we're talking about the pushing and pulling pressures of fluids themselves, and that's oncotic and hydrostatic pressure. The other thing that plasma proteins do is they help in pH regulation, meaning that they react with hydrogen ions to help balance out the pH of blood and plasma. Now, when we're talking about the gamma globulins, we're talking about lipid transport. So these lipids that need to be transported throughout the body, they'll actually attach to these globulins and they'll transport them to their necessary areas. Plasma is also responsible for dealing with a couple of other non-protein type substances. So these are things like non-protein nitrogenous substances, or NPN, and these are essentially waste products. So things like urea or uric acid or even creatinine. The liver is going to filter out the blood. That blood is going to, or those waste products are going to be sent to the kidneys to be excreted into the urine. The other thing that plasma does is it helps to transport organic nutrients. So things like glucose, amino acids, lipids, remember they're attached to those gamma globulins, and also fat soluble vitamins and steroid hormones. Also, other types of hormones that are dissolved in water can be transported in plasma, including vitamin B and C. These are water soluble vitamins. And there are some fat soluble vitamins, which are A, D, E, and K, and you need to know the difference between the two. We also want to take a look at electrolytes and gases because they are transported in the plasma. So in the plasma, electrolytes, such as your cations and anions, are going to be transported in the plasma. So cations are your positively charged ions, and your anions are your negatively charged anions. So these are actually listed in their order of abundance. So sodium is going to be far more abundant than magnesium in the blood, or in the plasma, I should say. Anions, same way. Chloride is going to be more prevalent in that plasma than, say, phosphate. The other thing and the reason that these are important, they're going to be important in assisting in maintaining that osmotic balance and pH. pH is over here, but it got kind of moved. pH. So the other thing that is really important about plasma is the transport of gases. Just like here, nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide are all transported in plasma. But the difference here is that nitrogen is going to be your most abundant, and it takes up the majority of it. This is followed by oxygen and then carbon dioxide. All right, so let's recap. Plasma is the majority of the blood component. It takes up about 55% of that total blood volume. The other 45% is made up of red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Plasma is made up also of about 92% water. And then those plasma proteins are responsible for maintaining the pressure and the osmotic balance. It's also really important that it contains waste, meaning that it's going to transport those wastes to where they need to go. Remember, the liver filters out the blood, and then that blood is filtered to the kidneys, and then it's going to be excreted out through urine. So that's where those waste components come in. It also serves as a transport medium, just like with this waste here. It's going to transport also vitamins, nutrients, hormones, and those lipids, which go to those gamma globulins. And that's it for our lesson on blood plasma. Make sure you check out all the resources attached to this lesson. Now go out and be your best selves today. And as always, happy nursing.